Now that you have a sculpted lion, it's time to get things set up for retopology. So first, I'm going to go ahead and save a new version of this. Do save as, and I'm going to call this your last name, lion, Retopo for retopology. And just save this in the same folder. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and do some housekeeping. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm in object mode. And I'm going to delete my reference images. I'm also going to delete my low poly line. And I'm going to start off making sure that my 3D cursor is in the middle of the grid. Again, if you can't see your 3D cursor for any reason, go to this flyout and make sure that you have origins checked, and then also make sure that you have 3D cursor checked. So I'm going to go ahead and do Shift A. And instead of adding a cube, this time I'm just going to add a plane. And before I start moving it, I want the origin of that plane to be at that center point of the grid. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, and then I'm going to move that plane. So notice that the origin is still in the center, but the plane is off to the side. That way, when I go back to modifiers and add my mirror modifier, so modifier, mirror modifier, then it's mirroring around that origin point. Now, if your line isn't perfectly symmetrical, there's going to be a certain amount of approximation you're going to have to make. But for our purposes, this should work out pretty well. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is get this plane kind of positioned around the lion. So I'm going to go ahead and move this up and rotate it. Now, the one thing is when you're working with a plane, it can be really tricky to figure out where is the inside and where is the outside. So I want to make sure that the inside of any given face is facing in and the outside's out so that the object is manifold. In order to double check that this is correct, what I can do is go back to this viewport overlays window. And then down here, there's face orientation. So I can check that. And anything that's facing out is going to be blue, but any interior faces are going to be red. So actually, I need to flip this around. So I'm going to go ahead to my front view and just rotate this around so that that blue is facing this lion. So now I know that the outside is facing the right direction. And so if I go to edge mode and start extruding edges, I know that they're going to be meeting up. So first, I'm going to start off just extruding around the belly of this lion, just making a little belly band. So that's getting my first sort of edge loop kind of set up. Now, one of the things I want to do is make sure that these middle edges are kind of as close to the center point as I can get them. So I'm going to go to my top view, and I can double check those individual vertices. I don't need to do that. I can use that merge limit, but especially when I'm first starting off, I like to be a little bit more precise, and then that'll make that merge limit work easier later on. So I'll go ahead and set this to 0, set this to 0. All right, so now that we have this line set up, there's a couple different ways to approach beginning this, this process. So one thing I'll do, usually with this first sort of band around the middle, is I'll set up snapping. So up here at the top, there's this little magnifying glass. If I click on that, you can see I've already have it set up to vertex and face. So you can shift select vertex and then face project. And what this is going to do is snap these objects to the form. You can tell it's working because the magnet is sort of turned on. So what I'll do is I'll just grab one of these vertices, and all I do is hit G, and it automatically snaps to the surface that's nearest it. So I'm just going to go through and grab these vertices and hit G. Now once I get to the middle line, I want to make sure that I'm keeping this form along that horizontal axis. All right, so this is pretty good, but it's a little hard to see what's happening here. So one thing I can do is add to this modifier the solidify modifier. And what this does is it adds a little bit of volume to that form. So I don't see anything yet, but if I go down to this solidifier, I can just pull up that thickness quite a lot. and you can see that it's red. That's not exactly what I want. I'm going to turn that offset to 0, and then it's going to go in the positive direction. So this is really, really big. I don't need it to be that big. I just want it to be a little bit larger than that form. Another thing I can do then is I can do Control R to add an edge loop to this, to add some subdivisions to it. But you can see that when I added that, I don't really see anything. So if I shied this for a minute, you can see that there's those edge loops. But what I really want to do to get this to stick to that form is also use the shrink wrap. So I'll go back to modifiers and go to shrink wrap. And remember, these work in a certain order. So the shrink wrap, if I click on the eyedropper here, I can select that high poly line, and it's going to shrink wrap to that. But if I turn these guys back on, you can see that it's kind of shrink wrapping, but it's kind of not. So typically, I'll move that shrink wrap above the solidify. So I'm just going to click and drag this right here. And now I can see that solidify working with that. So I don't want to ever apply the solidify. This is really just there to make it a little easier for me to see what's going on. But in this case, I do want to apply that shrink wrap. So I'm going to go tab back into object mode. I'm going to apply that shrink wrap. There's my solidify still. And I'll turn this off so I can kind of see how this is looking. I'll turn off my high poly lion. So there we can see that's the beginning of this retopology. Now I'm going to rename this. So I have this has a name already. So I'm going to call this lion retopo. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring that line back. And now I'm going to go ahead and add back another shrink wrap. So often what I'll do is I'll do a little bit of modeling, and then I'll add that shrink wrap back. I'm going to move this above the solidify. So I'll do a little bit of modeling. I'll add that shrink wrap, and then I'll apply it periodically and then keep going. So I'm going to select one of the vertices. I'll hit L to grab the whole thing, and then I'll do Shift D to duplicate it. And you can see it's like kind of snapping everywhere. It's kind of crazy. And then I'm just going to rotate this around since it's already kind of lion shaped. And I'm going to try to move this over. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. Sometimes people like to make an edge loop around the leg and then extrude up. I'm going to take a different approach. So I'm going to go to my edge mode, and I'm going to grab these 3 edges right here, and then the 3 edges on the opposite side. And then I'll hit Control E and then go down to Bridge Edge Loops. So now they're bridged up together. I'm going to go ahead and add a shrink wrap back. So I'll go to shrink wrap. I'll move that shrink wrap above my solidify. I'm going to set the target. So I can just click here too and set it to the high poly line. And now it's sitting on top of that. And then from here, I can see that I'm going to really need 2 edge loops here, that it's getting pretty big. So I'll do Control R to add an edge loop there. So I'll go ahead and grab this edge, and this one, and this one, and this one. And I'll go to my side view, and I'll hit E to extrude it. You can see it's doing a pretty good job trying to stick to that leg. This is one of those points where like I might need to start thinking about actually adding another face in between these guys. Okay, in a case like this, when you have a hole that you need to fill, you need to make sure that you're thinking about keeping these as quads. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and hit E to extrude one edge out. I know that looks like two, but that's one. And then I'm going to go ahead and select this guy here and hit F to fill it. And so I have two edges here. And then what I can do is go to edge mode, grab this edge, so notice there are two edges, and then I can hit F to fill it. And then I'll do the same thing over here. So I'm grabbing parallel edges and then filling them. And then this way, I can fill in holes and make sure that I'm still working in terms of quads. By the way, if at some point at this stage of things, if you're getting annoyed of looking at it as blue, you can go back up here to your viewport overlays, and you can go and uncheck face orientation, and it'll just show you this in that grayscale. So I'm going to go ahead and select these two opposite vertices, and I'm going to hit F for fill. Then I'm going to go to edge mode, grab these two opposite edges. So I know it's grabbing this other side too, but that's because of the mirror modifier. And then I'm going to hit F for fill that. And I can sort of look around and see that it's cutting into that line a little bit too much. So I'm going to need one more edge loop in between here in order to wrap around those legs. So I'll do Control R. And you can see that shrink wrap already does a lot of that good work for me. And then I'm going to start moving these around to, again, like make sure that the spacing of these is about right. Then I'll go to my side view and hit E to extrude and E to extrude again. At this point, I'm just going through and repeating that same workflow, cleaning up my topology and edge flow as I'm working. As I'm getting closer to the feet, I'm also turning off the snapping and turning off the shrink wrap in order to sort of see what's going on. You can see here, I'm turning off the high poly line. So trying to make sure that that edge flow wraps really nicely around the form is really important. So periodically, I'm going to be checking my edge flow. There you can see I'm checking it. And then correcting things if I'm realizing my edge flow isn't going in the way I want. Okay, at this point, I started to have some problems with the edge of the foot because of how I had added some of those edge loops. So you can sort of decide, like, how do you want that edge flow to work and what's going to make the most sense with the topology that you have. So sometimes in some cases it actually makes sense to merge vertices. So I don't know if this will work for this case, but what I'm going to go ahead is make sure that this merge vertices is turned on, and I'm going to grab this vertex and make sure snapping is turned on, and then snap it right to that vertex. So the problem with doing this is that it's going to make this really, really skewed plane right here. So this might not be the best option, so I can always undo that. Things that I'm doing here too is I'm deleting faces, deleting vertices, and then adding back new edge loops and new edge faces to kind of get the topology to go in the direction that I want it to. I'm going to hide that high poly just to double check what's happening with that topology. I'll tab into object mode, and then I'll go ahead and apply that. And that looks pretty okay. It's not my favorite retopology, but it'll work. So this is a long enough video. This is basically how that retopology process works. So I'm going to let you problem solve the rest of this on your own. So when you get to the tail, to some extent, you'll be able to just extrude this and then add edge loops as you need them to get a little bit of detail in there. But then at a certain point, you're going to have to add edge loops going down individual legs. And then when you get to the head, if I tab into wireframe mode, I can see that I'm probably going to need an extra edge loop going along the edge here to travel around the nose. So you want to keep pulling this edge loop out and over. And so one thing you might want to do is add some edge loops around the ears to make those ears work, and then try to match up how many edge loops you need going this way. So the more you practice retopology, the easier it gets. I can see that those shoulder blades are pretty sharp, so if I added an edge loop here to help with that ears, that might actually be a good thing. But yeah, then you're going to keep traveling around and finishing the retopology of the line.